Greetings, everyone. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute here at Yale Divinity School. The YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled Teaching Holy Troublemaking, Resources for Progressive Christian Formation with Wendy Claire Barrie and Daneen Akers. This is our fifth gathering for this year's YMI Lunch Lab series, and we have people joining us from across the country and even some siblings from other regions of the world today. Whether this is your first time with us or we are well known to each other, we are so glad to have you here. For our time today, Canon Barrie and Ms. Akers will speak to us. We'll have a short time in some breakout conversations, and we'll also have a brief Q&A session at the end of their presentation. We ask that you please remain muted throughout our time together, except when in those sharing times. But we will also be monitoring the chat window. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in there at any time. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them to you quickly and thank them for their work. The Youth Ministry Institute falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director of the center. And we're blessed to have Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thank you both for all that you do, and more importantly, for who you are. If you are new to the Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a free chance. That's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth, training modules for youth leaders, discussion forums. We have over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts in the past decade and a half. We have resources for anti-racism work. We have resources for youth working through mental health challenges, mission and outreach endeavors, links to other articles, etc. And all of those offerings are available for free, so please do feel free to check out our website. We have a few events coming up as well that I'd like to highlight quickly before we get started today. For anyone local to New Haven and the surrounding region, we invite you to join us on Saturday, April 6th for our spring in-person event, which is called Breaking the Silence about mental health challenges with children and teens. Our keynote speaker will be the Reverend Dr. Sarah Griffith Lund. The Reverend Dr. Lund is the Minister for Disabilities and Mental Health Justice on the national staff of the United Church of Christ denomination. And she has written several books on the topics of mental health, including a recent survival guide for teens who struggle in this area. In addition to the Reverend Dr. Lund's addresses, we'll have panelists of local mental health educators and practitioners who can provide local resources for follow-ups. It's going to be a day of resource sharing and insights, so please do join us if you can on Saturday, April 6th. Our final gathering for the year will be online again on May 1st and will come from the Reverend Dr. Gia Starr Brown. Reverend Dr. Brown will lead important conversations about anti-racism work with young people, and that is a conversation that is starting in May, but will actually continue into a multi-session offering in the fall. So please stay tuned for more information related to those events as well. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Canon Barrie and Ms. Akers. Wendy Claire Barrie is the author of Faith at Home, a handbook for cautiously Christian parents, and is finishing up her second book, The Church Post Sunday School, How to Be Intergenerational and Why It Matters. A writer, editor, speaker, and Christian educator, Wendy has served 8 Episcopal congregations on both coasts in the past 30 plus years, and she is currently canon for intergenerational ministries at St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral in Seattle, Washington, where she lives with her family. Daneen Akers is an author, film director, and educator extraordinaire. Her works include Dear Mama God, a children's prayer book filled with simple gratitudes addressed to the divine in feminine form, and is also the author of Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints, a middle grades anthology with original portraits and profiles of diverse faith leaders who worked for more love and justice in their corners of the world. As a part-time resident of the San Francisco Film Society's Film House, Daneen directed documentaries focusing on identity and faith, including Seventh Gay Adventists, a film about faith, identity, and belonging. Daneen teaches English at UNC Asheville part-time and holds a graduate degree from San Francisco State University. She lives near Asheville, North Carolina with her family, and she is fond of books and walks in the woods and songs around campfires and snuggles with her children and large pots of hot beverages enjoyed with friends. Wendy and Daneen, welcome. We are honored to have you both here, and we are honored to be able to learn from you in this space.
Thank you so much. It is such a privilege to be here. So I'm going to give you just the quick overview of the flow for today. I'm going to start with a big picture context of Holy Trouble storytelling, and then I will toss it over to Wendy, who's going to talk more about the faith formations and her story with that. And then we're going to do a deeper dive into a couple of sample lessons that we've worked on developing together over the years. And then we'll go to a Q&A. We're really thrilled to hear from any of you, your hopes, your questions, your stories. And then we'll come back and I have a special guest for a special blessing song at the end of our session. So it's great to be here. I would like to tell you a story. Now, if you're human, that phrase just got your attention because we humans are storytelling creatures. It's what we do. Our brains are acutely attuned to narratives and stories. Narratives are the structures that we have developed. This is what Homo sapiens do. Some anthropologists argue it's what made Homo sapiens eventually the dominant humans that are on our planet today. We develop stories to deliver information, very important information about how to survive. Remember this story because there's a tiger that lurks at that tree overlooking the watering hole. So essentially, it's a survival mechanism, but that gradually turned into stories that tell us who we are, what we're about, what we value, and how we disseminate that widely. The really interesting book that came out more than a decade ago called Sapiens by Dr. Noah Yuval Harari, which maybe some of you have read, actually argues that storytelling is what Homo sapiens did that eventually made it that there were not other types of humans developing, because you can have small bands. Even today, our closest primate cousins have small bands of like maybe 120 to 150 members. That's really all we can keep up with on the gossip as to like who to trust, who's sleeping with who actually cheated us last week, so we're not going to trust them this week. We can only keep tabs on about 150 individuals. However, narrative can form these mythologies that motivate far, far, far beyond. You look at our nation state stories, our religious stories, things that we tell, they can unite, millions and millions of individuals around a shared story. So this is what we do as humans. Storytelling makes us humans. If you want to change anything, large or small, tell a different story. If you remember nothing else about this session, that's really my thesis. So I'm just going to say it a few times that stories will do their work. So we can trust storytelling to do their work. I'm no original on this. This is exactly what Jesus modeled so brilliantly in his teaching. Ask Jesus a tricky question and you're going to get a story. Who is my neighbor? Well, you know what? One time there was a man who was on this trip and he got robbed. You're going to get a story, and that's going to stick with us. When I think back to my youth and, I was at church almost every week, sometimes more than once a week. The things I remember are the stories. Occasionally the pastor would tell a phenomenal story, and I can still pull those up today.
And so when will you find out where you're going?
Oh, sorry.
I'm hoping to.
Somebody needs to mute. There we go. So I want to tell you a story about how I came to progressive faith formations work. It was not an intentional, here's point A, here's point B. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, a little girl and her parents are sitting in the pews of a church. The little girl is drawing on an iPad and eating goldfish snacks. By all accounts, you wouldn't know she was paying attention to anything going on up front. The pastor is preaching a pretty standard sermon for a conservative denomination. It was about how he had sobering news. Our hearts were bad. They weren't good. These were defective hearts. Of course, he had good news. We did not have to get judged on our hearts. We could get judged on the heart of Jesus. Later that afternoon, as this young family was driving home, the little girl asks, "Mommy, am I going to die soon?" She's 3, maybe 4. The parents are perplexed. Why is she worried about dying? And as she starts talking, they start to piece things together. She actually had been listening during that sermon, even though she was drawing on her iPad and eating goldfish snacks. She heard the pastor say that she had a bad heart. And she had already experienced a tragic loss in her family that made her know that people can die because of a defective heart, even very little people. The dad looked over at the mom and said, "That's the last time I am ever taking her to a church that teaches her that her heart is bad and can't be trusted." So maybe you've guessed that I was that mom and that little girl was my oldest daughter. That was more than 10 years ago. She's now 15. I remember that day well because it was when I realized that the stories that shape us start seeping in so much younger than I would have imagined. I didn't yet know the term atonement theories or that there were scores of them, all with long pedigrees in the Christian faith. I didn't know of something called original blessing, which if anybody hasn't read this book yet, this is beautiful. This is Daniel Schroer's Original Blessing. She's a reverend in Dallas. And this is sort of a layperson's take on Matthew Fox's Original Blessing done with his blessing. And it's a really beautiful book that I recommend as a resource. So I didn't know that term. I didn't know any of that. I just knew that we were not going to raise our daughter inside of a story that told her fundamentally that her heart was bad. There are stories big and small, transforming us individually and collectively all the time. One of my favorite authors, who's a beautiful transformative storyteller, an Irish peace activist, he speaks with a beautiful Irish accent, which makes him his stories especially great to listen to. How Not to Be Afraid by Gareth Higgins, another book I absolutely recommend. And he wrote a children's book with Brian McLaren called The Seventh Story or Corey and the Seventh Story. There's 2 versions of it, but that is a small version of this. The subtitle is 7 Ways to Live When Everything Seems Terrifying. And he says that stories are in some ways gods. I'll say that again because I think it's pretty powerful. Stories are in some ways gods. That's how powerful they are for what they do for us. He goes on to say, the stories we tell shape how we experience everything. When we tell a diminished story, we make a diminished life. And here are some of the dominant yet diminishing stories our culture often recites, usually without asking if they are true. And if anybody wants these notes, I'm happy to share them afterwards, by the way, if you're a note taker. So here are some of the stories that Gareth Higgins talks about that our culture tells us that are very diminishing, and yet we don't actually fact check them. Stories like, we are born into darkness. Emerging from it will require fighting our way out, even if that means hurting other people. There isn't enough. We have to look out for ourselves. Here's another. You have to hustle and work hard. Everything is up to you. Another, you're broken. The world is broken. This is just the way it will be on the sinful earth. There's not much you can do about it. Another, violence brings order out of chaos and can literally redeem things. Encouragingly, Gareth also says that stories of connection, courage, creativity, and the common good are more true, yet less frequently told. And our brain more easily recalls shock than it does wisdom. It evolved that way to protect us, but it's done its job a little too well for the modern world. We remember the sobering, the bad, the terrifying, much more than we remember the true, the good, and the wise. We're not good at noticing gradual changes, gradual improvements. So we have to do a better job of telling these stories with imagination. When I think about progressive faith formations in adolescence, what I come back to is this foundational belief that stories can be trusted to do their work. So the big thing for me is, what kind of stories are we telling? I came to this as a mom who was pretty desperate for better faith-based stories for her own children. I didn't come at this from a clergy perspective or a I need to write a curriculum perspective, even though now we have. And in some ways, I think that might be why we've gotten some good responses from people saying that their youth have connected with these stories and this curriculum in ways that they never have others. And I think it's simply because it started with good stories. And when you start there, humans can't help but pay attention. That's how I came to write Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints. It's this anthology. And the North Star was Bayard Rustin. Now, I expect that anybody who shows up for this lunch lab might know a little bit more about Bayard Rustin than the average person, but he's been an unsung hero of the civil rights movement for an incredibly long time. There is a brand new film on Netflix called Rustin. That is up for an Oscar, and I do think that it was executive produced by the Obamas. So his story is starting to get out there more. Bayard was Black. He was also a lifelong Quaker. He learned from his grandmother Quaker principles of nonviolence, that he became an advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King about. He studied in India at the with Gandhi's disciples and brought those teachings back to the United States for the civil rights movement. He was deeply influential in that movement, helped plan the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. But because he was also openly gay, he was forced to stay in the background of that movement. It was not just a liability, it was a crime. And so he actually was remarkably open, given the, what could have happened. But he was very clear that his Quaker faith was the reason that he believed in equality and that the human family are all one. So his story was really my North Star. He termed what I call holy trouble angelic troublemaking. It's the same thing that Representative John Lewis called good trouble. They worked together. Bayard was many years senior to John Lewis. Good and holy trouble asks questions that disrupt a status quo that is harming people or leaving out necessary perspectives. This kind of storytelling, to return to Gareth Higgins' words from his book, they help create a shelter underneath which a better world can be built in collaboration with others who are also caring about the common good. Here are a few of the stories that are more true than the scarcity, fear, anxiety, violence, will be required stories that our dominant culture typically tells. And these are the stories that Holy Troublemakers and Unconventional Saints have taught me. Bayard Rustin being my North Star, and I'll this is his portrait in the book. These portraits were mostly done. I worked with about 36 artists on this, so a lot of different styles. This is done by a Spanish street artist, actually. So Bayard teaches us many things, but he's the one who taught me about holy trouble and being committed to nonviolence while trying to work for the common good. Reverend Will Gafney, whom is a modern day, very prophetic voice. If anybody doesn't have, well, she has many books that everybody should have, but this lectionary for the whole church, I especially recommend. She teaches us how important it is to listen within our stories to the voices we don't normally hear. She comes from a womanist perspective, and so she is normally looking for the voices of women, children, enslaved people, those who the stories are not normally highlighting. What do we learn when we recenter on them? She also teaches that our God language matters. And in fact, it is some of her translations that helped me inspire Dear Mama God. And she has all the Psalms in her lectionary are written with the divine and feminine form, and she has so many gorgeous, beautiful names. There's a whole reference at the end of this book of divine titles that are gender neutral or feminine, and just reading through them can make me weep. Majestic One, Mighty One, Mother of Wisdom, Mother of the Mountains, Source of Life, She who is, Redeeming God, Sheltering God, She who hears, the Anointed One, Womb of Life. And so she does the Psalms with these titles because she knows so many people pray the Psalms, and it's very important to have an experience of praying to a God who encompasses a gender that we have often removed from anything related to divinity. She also has some names for Jesus, by the way, that I think are really also worth noting. God-born, Rabbi, and Son of Woman. I especially like that one because that story tells us that Jesus's humanity came from his mother. So if he's a son of a human, it's the woman that he's a son of. And it's really incredible what it's holy troublemaking work to just slightly shift the language like that. And she has some marvelous scholarship, as do others, but that's not the topic of this talk. But yeah, holy troublemaking work indeed, Reverend Gafney. Wangari Maathai. She teaches us that peacemaking is as simple as planting a tree. And that is important peace work. One of my favorites, this portrait is embroidered. Thich Nhat Hahn teaches so many things. But that peace begins as an inside job. You know, even just smiling is peace work. And taking this moment as a gift, if we can be present to it. Mariam Molkara, one of the first transgender rights activists in Iran, teaches us that when we are authentic and work for our own freedom, we make people around us free too. Gustavo Gutierrez teaches us that we've been made by love and for love, and that the divine has a preference for those on the margins. Rabbi Ruttenberg teaches us that we love God by loving God's creation. Let's see, where did my alphabetizing got off here? So Valarie Kaur is in here. When I start talking, suddenly my details, here we go. Valarie Kaur, the Sikh thinker and filmmaker, teaches us to see no strangers, and that in our work, we cannot dehumanize those whom we might be in opposition to ideologically. And I think that is so crucial today. I remember I go to her often when there is something going on in the world, to her public teaching pages to see how she is phrasing things, because I remember a little while ago, there was a lot of people gleefully talking about something idiotic that somebody that a lot of people disagree with, who's a very powerful politician, had done. And she said, let's remember, we cannot dehumanize anyone. And the way that doesn't mean we have to feel warm fuzzies about them. We just stay curious about them. We wonder, what is their story? And that holds us in our humanity, even if that person is not holding themselves or us in our humanity. And it is such crucial work in nonviolent movements, which Holy Trouble is all about, is that we never, ever think of people as the enemy. There are bad ideas, there are harmful ideas, but the goal is always that those who are doing harmful, oppressive things will eventually realize that, and they themselves will be freed from these harmful ideologies. So it is crucial that while we are doing holy troublemaking work, that we never dehumanize, demean, or diminish other people. And that is really, really difficult to do in our current media landscape. And I turn to these people in Holy Troublemakers frequently to remind myself of these things. Oh, Mary Oliver, I have to show you her because she is definitely my. I have Mary Oliver devotions, and she is my devotional reader many days now. And Jillian Gamble, the same artist that did the cover, did her portrait. And I think one of the reasons I love her so much is I realized how infrequently we see people portrayed in their elder years. And I just love that one. She teaches us that paying attention to the more than human world is our work. So these are a few of the stories that have been motivating me, teaching me. And after a little bit, I asked Wendy Claire Barrie if she would be willing to help turn these into a curriculum. We kept getting asks about that. And as I approached this as a parent and somebody who really wanted better stories with my own children, and I do have a teaching background, but I found that I did not know how to turn things into, actually, the kids have 40 minutes before church starts to do something. And Wendy is a complete genius with intergenerational faith formations and finding like the wonderful little activities to take the lofty ideas and turn them into tangible activities that are going to really like help us feel this in our bodies. So I would love to turn this over to Wendy for
Actually, Daneen,
Oh,
the first
yes.
thing you said is, did I know someone you might work with on the curriculum? And
You're right.
I said, I think I'd like to do this. This would be really fun. And we did have a great time. I worked on the first set of lessons during the pandemic and just finished the last set.
Wendy's
So-
book, Faith at Home, had been one of my little lifelines when I was a parent in massive angst about faith shifting and figuring out what am I going to do for my kids. And her book, I probably have it sitting over here. Oh, here it is. I do. I have a little bookshelf next to me with all these books that are great companions. Was just fabulous. And we went and had tea once when she was visiting her mom.
Yeah.
And she sat me down. She's like, "It's gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine." And who knew that this many years later we would be collaborating on curriculum together?
Well, thank you. It is my passion. The thing that gets me up in the morning and sometimes keeps me awake at night is faith formation, and my lifelong context has been the Episcopal Church. We use these words, shaped, molded, formed, to describe how we become who we are. And just as in the rest of our life, who we are as people of faith happens in the same way. We are formed by experience. So faith formation is what shapes us. We are formed by worship and service. We are formed by community and relationships. We are formed in our identity as followers of Jesus in everything we do. When we say Christian education, everyone knows what we're talking about. Sunday school, maybe youth group, definitely Bible study, adult forums. But at least since the 1980s, we have very intentionally, those of us in religious education, been using, and I think particularly in liturgical churches, been using the words Christian formation because we saw the limits of Christian education. Education is an incredibly important part of faith formation, but it's only part. And there's so much more. So part of what we're doing in this curriculum is broadening that definition of what forms us, what shapes us. I think it's important for you to hear a story about my context. I grew up at St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Laguna Beach, California. And it was a place that saw my gifts as a child and as a teenager and took them seriously enough to use them every week. I was there from ages 2 to 18, and I thought every church was like my church. I remember the smell of incense and the ringing of Sanctus bells and the sight of people coming down the aisle in t-shirts, shorts, and flip-flops. It was that kind of place. We had Christmas pageants and pancake suppers. We stopped eating green grapes in support of Cesar Chavez and the migrant farm workers. We boycotted Nestle's. Let me tell you, that's really hard when you're a kid because they were marketing baby formula in underdeveloped countries. And we readied the rectory several times. It became home to a succession of Vietnamese families who were coming in as refugees in the 1970s. And until I was old enough to know better, I thought every church had gay and lesbian families. Faith in action is what formed me. When I was 10, I was paid to help Miss Gigi with the babies and toddlers in the church nursery. I was paid, I think, 50 cents an hour. And I knew that it was my job to help them feel God's love. And we did that by playing with them, singing them songs, reading to them, giving them a bottle. It's how I learned to change a diaper. I know that wouldn't be safe church these days for a 10-year-old, but that was it showed me that my church thought I was responsible and had something to offer. At 11, I was confirmed, and I was absolutely awestruck that the adults in my context encouraged us to wrestle with big ideas like transubstantiation and consubstantiation. At 14, I started teaching Sunday school. I sang in the choir, which was made up of people of all ages. And at that point, I was the youngest member of my church's Christian education committee. It was led by my beloved Mrs. Mudge, who not only was the director of religious education at my church, she was my social studies teacher in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and she was a neighbor of ours. The Christian Education Committee met on Sunday afternoons so that I could actually attend the meetings. And during my freshman year of high school, my parents separated. And for a few months, my mother stopped coming to church. And it was just my mother who came to church. My father was a Christmas and Easter kind of guy. I got on the bus and I went by myself because I was pretty well convinced they could not have church without me. They needed me. At least that was my distinct impression. And that's what led to me never feeling that I wasn't a part of what happened on Sunday mornings and so much more during the week. And because I grew up in a progressive Christian context, I also didn't feel the need to stop going to church at any point, no matter where I found myself. So when I was a junior in college, my beloved Mrs. Mudge was ordained as the first woman Episcopal priest in Orange County. I was there. And my first job out of college was teaching in an Episcopal school. And that church became my church. I taught preschool and I taught 6th through 12th grade drama in the afternoons, which was a lot. And we had chapel twice a week in the preschool. And whenever a priest didn't show up, it defaulted to the 2 Episcopalians in the group of teachers to lead it. Eventually, I was asked to be the faculty representative on the search committee for a new rector. And when he was hired, he asked me to become his church school director. And that's what led me on the path that I have been on now since 1989. The first church that I worked at when I became a parent was All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena, California. And that's a place that has a deep history of social action driven by the gospel. And it's important to know that the stories that we told the children there that I took in as a new parishioner are part of what forms people in that context. We do not make good and holy trouble because we are good and holy people. We do it because we follow Jesus. And this is our work as Christians. We are joining him in helping to bring about the kingdom, the realm of God, right? This is what we do because of this is who we are. So at All Saints Pasadena in the 1940s, the first story I learned was that the then rector Frank Scott stood in front of trains that were taking Japanese Americans to internment camps to protest that. And the rector who followed him, John Burt, was the only white minister to share the dais with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1964 at the Rose Bowl, when he was speaking on racial justice in Los Angeles. The rector who followed him, George Regas, preached an anti-Vietnam War sermon in 1971 that made headlines. In 1983, All Saints became a sanctuary church, offering services to refugees fleeing conflict in Central America. They established an AIDS service center, and George Regas eventually preached on a woman's right to choose, also very controversial, made headlines. But he was taking that from the gospel perspective. And this really impacted our kids and our teenagers especially. It is now, my son Peter is 21 and he was 18 months old when I started working there. So at this point, All Saints has had at least, I want to say, going on 35 years of youth having voice and vote on the vestry, the governing body of the church. So kids who grow up there grow up knowing that they have a very important role to play. They have something to offer. Their voice matters. They share in not only telling the stories, but creating them. While I was on staff, George Regas, as rector emeritus, also preached an anti-war sermon on the eve of the election in 2004. And it was the first time the IRS tried to make the argument that an anti-war sermon was implicitly endorsing a Democratic candidate, which was a battle we were involved in for 2.5 years before they finally dropped it. But that was quite a remarkable thing, because peace is a gospel mandate. So these stories of holy troublemaking are everywhere. They're in our own family stories as well. And family stories, however it is that we come up to hardship and conflict or adversity in some way, these family stories matter. They matter in a particular way because there is very sound research that shows that kids who have hear these stories of how when their parents were younger, when their grandparents came from another country and emigrated and made new homes, it provides a sense of connectedness and identity. Yes, absolutely. But it also, research over the last 30 years has said that children benefit in a variety of significant ways. They can find themselves in a larger narrative, what researchers Marshall Duke and Robin Fivush call a strong intergenerational self. And it helps them develop resilience, self-confidence, and self-esteem. But this is also why we tell Bible stories, right? To find ourselves in the larger narrative, to connect ourselves to something much bigger than ourselves. It is, the Bible, of course, it keeps us tethered to a people and a story that has been there long before us, and a story that will be there long after us. That's from my friend Curlin Richter, who's an Episcopal priest in Oregon. She spoke at the first Why Christian conference, which is a great resource ongoing. That's something that Nadia Bolz-Weber and Rachel Held Evans of blessed memory set up. That's still going strong. We want to give our kids stories that remind them that they are beloved. So Bible stories and these stories of holy troublemaking fit together in really beautiful ways. And frankly, some of our kids are more interested in stories that are affecting others than they are interested in the Bible itself right now. And that is a fault mainly, I think, of the media and our culture today, because we're presenting a false narrative about the Bible, right? That is also not the subject of this talk, but I think it's important to name. So in 2014, I heard Christian Smith, the sociologist, give the Ensign lecture at Yale Divinity School, and he was reporting his conclusions drawn from the fourth wave of data in the National Study of Youth and Religion, which, as you probably already know, is a longitudinal study of more than 3,000 youth, which began in 2001. And he said unequivocally that the single greatest influence on the spiritual and religious lives of teenagers is their parents, not clergy, not youth ministers, and that home is where faith is passed on, not church, not camp, not mission trips. And the means of transmission is ordinary life practices, not preaching, not programs, not rites of passage. Nothing else, he says, comes remotely close to matching the influence of parents on religious faith and the religious faith practices. And the statistics are really startling. 82% of children whose parents were active in their congregations who practiced their faith, so faith in action, and talked about matters of faith at home, were religiously active as young adults. 82%. Only 1% of older teens whose parents placed little emphasis on religion or were religiously active as young adults. And this isn't the only study. We now have over 40 years of longitudinal research across the country, across denominations, showing just this. And Dr. Smith's latest research is with parents, not youth. In October of 2021, just before I came to the Cathedral at St. Mark's, I was participating in a webinar where he was sharing his latest wisdom with clergy and educators. And the final question was about the implications of his research on congregations. He put down his notes and he stared into all of the little Zoom boxes on the screen. And he said, if it isn't about relationships, don't do it. It doesn't matter. Our work is about connecting people to each other. And that's where they experience God. Right? We have a very relational faith. We learn to be disciples from each other. So I really took that message to heart. I take that message into my work, and I certainly took it into this curriculum. I believe that faith formation is something lifelong and life-wide, and it continues even if it changes. And one of the principles I brought into this, we never have ministry with children and youth that does not involve adults. So faith formation with children and youth is always intergenerational. I am a very strong believer that the best people for kids to interact with at church are people who are not their parents. But part of the beauty of this kind of intergenerational work is that it strengthens and bolsters parents, and it gives them opportunities to talk about faith at home, because it's really important that we talk to our kids about what's happening in the world, in our country, in our neighborhoods, through a lens of faith. Everything that's worth talking about is worth talking about through the lens of faith. I think it's really important that we say to parents and the adults who are teaching our kids, you don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to know it all. You do not have to be a biblical scholar. You do not have to have a degree in education. This is about relationship. And because you are practicers of faith, and I love that we use that word practice, right? When we talk about our spiritual practices, it is not something we get right or finally achieve. It's just something that we do and keep doing and maybe get better at. I'm really bad at centering prayer, which is my husband's 30-year practice. But I keep practicing. Who knows? I do think it's good for me. I think it's important even for clergy to model saying, I don't know, or that's really hard for me too. You can say, what do you think? You can say, in my opinion, this comes from my dear friends, Donald Schell and Rick Fabian at St. Gregory of Nyssa, which informed our practice at St. Lydia's, my dinner church in Brooklyn, where I met my husband, and informed the work I did at Trinity Church Wall Street in Lower Manhattan through Daniel Simons, who connected to both St. Gregory's and St. Lydia's. The question we always asked after worship or any kind of experience, a walk, a movie, an argument, whatever it was, we'd ask, what did you notice? Because that immediately centers the response on the experience and on the connection you're making to the story that you've just heard. That's the reason to use it in a curriculum, rather than on an opinion or an idea. It's in the experience, it's in the stories that we're most likely to make a spiritual connection. So I also want to just once more say, we're not interested in anyone becoming experts. I think that's a role that clergy too can step away from. You are going to get a gift in your work, particularly with children and youth, because they may be the ones who introduce you to a bigger God, a God of wonder and mercy and love. So that's what I hope that we are doing in our work together. Daneen, especially, I think that the people that you've chose to profile and the ones that we have written our lessons about really emphasize this. There's an emphasis on mystery. There's an emphasis on wonder. There's an emphasis on awe. And so I think this might be a good segue to pulling up a lesson plan.
Yes. If Megan, if you could pull up the sample lesson, and I want to just, say lots of amens to what you're saying there, Wendy, and especially the bit about children being our teachers, because I do think it can seem so overwhelming. And I know a lot, I go to a very small congregation in Asheville. It's dually affiliated, UCC and Alliance Baptists, which I had to move to the South to know how many types of Baptists there were, including progressive ones. And we're a small church and we do not have staff. We have 2 pastors who are each part-time, both have other jobs that pay their primary income. And so we don't have a big staff to do this. And I think it can be super overwhelming sometimes. And many of the progressive churches I know are really struggling post-COVID because many of them followed a lot of local advice, public health advice, and like things fell apart in terms of consistency, and families and family life is busier than ever. If just getting us all to church is always an accomplishment. And so I think it can seem overwhelming to implement a program. And I just think that's one reason why, like, taking off the pressure and recognizing, you don't have to be an expert. Follow your curiosity. Follow, like, the kids are the best teachers. And I say kids, and I say that about my college age students too, the students, the young people. That has been the biggest blessing of parenting and teaching for me, is the return to wonder, because this world does have sobering situations, and it's also so beautiful. And the kids still know that. So following the kids and their wonder and what are they noticing is always going to end up someplace interesting. And we don't have to have all the answers. And I think modeling, I can't even tell you how many times I tell my children, I don't know, but what a good question. Like, let's see what we might find. What do you think? And I always go back, especially when I don't always know what I think about a Bible story or something right now, I'll always go to, well, the story teaches us. Because I'm a big believer that story has like truth that transcends maybe courtroom facts. And that's the whole point of mythologies, is to teach us the values, regardless of like the slight details of the story, whether they would have happened that way in a police report. So that is my go-to, is like, well, the story tells us this. And I have found that to be a wonderful shelter under which to rest when something comes up. So this is we pulled 2 samples. Let's see, there are 12 in each lesson. So I'm thinking out loud here.
12,
And
12 in each
yeah, 12 in each. So 24 total now.
sets.
So we did a curriculum over the pandemic. And then when we just finished a second curriculum, we decided to name them. So to keep them apart, other than just part 1, part 2. So part 1 is Long Live Good and Holy Trouble. And it's an introduction to holy troublemaking and those concepts, and especially trying to recognize that sometimes holy troublemaking feels like a protest and it feels bold and big, but sometimes it's also really contemplative and quiet, and it's poetry and art and making cookies for the neighbors as well. Like, and a lot of it is about perspective. It's that worldview that's underneath it. Not just that it's like activism, I don't think always looks the way that our media stories portray activism. It can be holding space for rest because you are valuable, because you exist, not because you do. It can be refusing to dehumanize, a grumpy person down your street, and continuing to wonder. It's those perspective shifts. It's honoring the more than human world as having, as much value as a not just what we can extract from it, but preserving it is, should be part of our GDP. Like things like that are at their core questions and perspectives that ask the status quo to adjust. So it's really about the perspectives in there. So it's hard to pull just 2 sample lessons from 24. Wendy did such a brilliant job. The second part is the second curriculum we named We Are Made of Stories and Stardust, to emphasize that it's about the stories that we tell, and also we and the trees and everything we see are made of the same stuff. It's all
We're part of the story.
We're part of the story. Absolutely.
The
We
unfolding
are
story.
animals in this more than human world, this beautiful place as well. So here's just 2 of them. And if you want to scroll down, Megan. So they all open a bit like this, and Wendy did this beautiful job of, they all have this exact format. So we have the theme for Wangari Maathai. It's making peace by tending the earth. A little preparation, any materials you're going to need. I love the gathering, a clap, a song, a bell, a candle, and then this invocation. Do you want to read the invocation, Wendy?
Sure. We are made of stories and stardust. We tell the stories of holy troublemakers and unconventional saints, people of faith who have worked for love, justice, and compassion to inspire us, make us bold, and connect us to each other and the love that makes us one.
All right. And if you'll scroll a little bit more, Megan. So you can have this with the actual book, but Wendy also did a brilliant job of doing short little synopses for them. So this is a short synopsis of Wangari Maathai's story. And then there's always a little reflection question, the what do you notice moment. And then some simple do's. There's an all age one. I love this
All
one.
of this relies on having a connection to the internet, because
yes,
in part, well, for lots of reasons, not the least of which is I am much more a collector of resources, a curator of resources than I am a creator of resources. There's so much good material out there. So there are links, live links to everything that we want you to look at. So you'll get a copy of this. It's, I think, available in the chat now, but you'll also get a copy of this sent to you, and you'll have a code for a discounted copy of the curriculum as well at the end of this.
Yeah, we actually did this activity with the youth in our church not that long ago. We went on a tree walk and tried to, after reading Wangari's story, and trying to identify them and just hug them. Of course, some of the kids thought that was silly. Some of them absolutely loved it. Yeah, feeling the bark. What do we notice? The sensations, and it was really, really occupying all the senses. So this is if you have, there's always a little wrap up and then a little like if you want to expand this. So you could really turn all of these lessons into easily 2 or 3 sessions, because there's, if you have more time, option, and a dig deeper. This is normally for like older teens.
Or
We
even
recognize
young
that a lot of,
adults.
yeah, young adults, absolutely. I know a fair number of young adults and adults that use this as like their own
I do
little
too.
devotionals.
When I arrived at St. Mark's, they were already using the book with the Seattle Service Corps,
Oh, neat.
which is a group of young adults from 20 to 30. So, and what
I
we've
think
learned actually
there's a
from,
little bit, part of my mission in life is that we only often allow children to have beautiful books. Those are the books that we put the resources into making beautiful. And I really think of all ages, we really love and appreciate beautiful things. So while technically Holy Troublemakers is a middle grades aimed anthology, I like to think of it for adults too. And adults just don't think of themselves as getting picture books all that often, but I think it's genius.
well, and my title at St. Mark's is Canon for Intergenerational Ministries. I'm responsible for education and formation for 0 to 100, but I am always thinking of ways to get people of all ages engaged. And so that's absolutely something I was paying attention to. And we have come to learn that people who've used these lessons, many of them have used them as an all ages curriculum. So
Yeah,
that was really
I'm so, yeah,
empowering.
I love that Wendy brought that experience and expertise to this, because most progressive churches that I know of have small groups, and it needs to be kind of all ages together because they just don't have the staff, unless you're one of the bigger main lines like at a cathedral where Wendy is and things like that. But there's a lot of churches that are trying to do with, you know, one person or a parent volunteer, and if you can do the same thing together, with just different scaffolds, then it works. So there's always a dig deeper where you can go, you know, you can take this a lot longer with somebody like Wangari, for which there are many wonderful materials. Younger kids, suggestion, and then a closing and extinguishing the candle.
Very important.
Yes, out west, y'all maybe should just use those LED candles, actually. All right, if you'll scroll, Megan, to the next example. Oh, and then they also each have a coloring page. I love the flow of this one. So the artist and layout designer that I work with a lot did these pages. And so they're all quotes either from the person or some sort of closely connected theme to just bring it home and just get the idea in our bodies a little bit more and give hands something to do, which I love to do. I love coloring, even though again it's considered a kid thing, but I think it's really marvelous.
So I'm here in California right now visiting my mother, who's all since the 1970s had her own set of colored pencils and markers that I was not allowed to use, and her own coloring books. Just saying.
That's smart.
And
Yes.
it is the first, she's ill right now, but the first thing that she did sitting up at the table besides eat was to color.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
It's very, very contemplative.
Absolutely. I find it gives the chattery part of my brain something to do, and I can actually focus on the people around me and what they're saying. So another sample. So I really actually tried to pick holy troublemakers who are known and unknown. So Leslie Foster would be one that probably a lot of people haven't heard of, but I wanted to model to kids that you can be a holy troublemaker. You don't have to be a famous person. And some of the famous people, say like, you know, Mr. Rogers or Wangari Maathai or Florence Nightingale, are well known, but they're not as well known for the faith that motivated them. So that's sort of the special angle that we're trying to bring.
Well, yes, our kids learn a lot about people like Dr. King and Rosa Parks in school, but they don't learn that that principally it was their faith that motivated them. I was really shocked the first time that I went to the bus stop where Rosa Parks boarded the bus that she was not going to sit in the back for, and that her copy of her Bible is open and in a glass case there.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that tremendously moving, and we're missing these opportunities to really use the lens of faith and the context of helping to bring about the realm of God.
Yeah.
So that's a particular focus. So
Yeah.
let's look at Leslie.
Yeah, so Leslie is a filmmaker and a poet. And one of the things that I really loved about Leslie's story is that it brings forth a really important theme, which is how do we change our culture? If we look at something and go like, wow, we have really unhealthy ideas about this. Well, how, the culture is there because of a powerful story that has been told and told so much that we don't question it, and we often aren't even aware that it's there. So Leslie's work is all about, he's an experimental filmmaker, so it doesn't follow traditional narratives usually, sort of thing you're going to find at an installation at an art museum kind of piece of work. And it's about how do you change the stories. So I love that Leslie's story brings that forward for youth to talk about. So if you want to scroll, Megan, to the second page, Leslie's
So
story
what,
also begins with a story that I think more of us need more of, which is he was
you should read this. You should read the synopsis probably, just because
yes,
people might not know him.
yeah, absolutely. Leslie Foster is a filmmaker and a poet who uses images to tell stories that get us past our usual ideas about the world and tap into something deep within us. One of his best ideas came to him while he was really bored, sitting alone with nothing to do. He was at jury duty, which you'll find out if you read the whole story in the book. And he intentionally had not taken a phone because he knows that boredom can be helpful. Leslie started, after a lot of sitting, waiting, and staring, Leslie started imagining what later became his visual poem, a short film called Mother God. And God is spelled Godde here intentionally, that helps people think differently about who and what God is. Leslie was born in Indonesia and grew up in the Philippines, Thailand, and the United States because his parents were missionaries. Living in so many different countries and cultures made Leslie aware of how much we do and think that comes from our culture, and that if we only know one culture, we often don't question it, even when elements of our culture may harm others. Leslie says, quote, because people create culture, we can also change it. Through his art, he tells stories that challenge assumptions. Quote, I want my films to be part of changing culture for the good of us all. So I really love Leslie's story as a way to be a bit of meta for the rest of us, to help us realize like, oh, right, culture, it's this thing, we're sitting in it all the time and we don't even recognize it. But because of Leslie's life experience of living in several countries, he has the awareness of like, oh, right, there's a lot of different ways humans do things and it's not right or wrong, it's just their culture. And so the reflect on this one is to, think about something your culture teaches you that you maybe question now. And what a powerful noticing to like sit with for a minute. And then Wendy has a couple of wonderful suggestions
It
for
was
activities.
hard. This took me a while. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like, there's a lot of information about a lot of these holy troublemakers, but I wanted to do something authentic for Leslie. So my suggestion for all ages is to put an empty cardboard box in the center of your group and invite your group to 5 or 10 minutes of silence. And then give each person just 20 seconds to find an everyday object to put inside the box. And if your group is small, you can invite them to find 2 different objects. When everyone has contributed an object to the box, give them an opportunity to collaborate, to tell a beautiful story with the items in the box. Decide as a group whether all the items need to be used. And then you're going to try it a second time, silently, using the items to make a design or a structure. And try it a third time, allowing the group to decide whether to use words and giving each person the opportunity to add or remove an item. What new story can be told? And this is a quote from Leslie. I'm never happier than when I am working with other artists to create something together that's going to challenge assumptions through beautiful images, Leslie says. And then you ask your group, what was it like to work together in this way? How did using everyday objects challenge you to think about beauty?
I love it. Love it. And then, an activity for an older youth. I just noticed the time. So let's scroll through, Megan, to the next page. A little bit more about the using God language intentionally differently, with some books suggestions. And that just, it's amazing how much just even spelling God differently, even though it sounds the same, helps us understand like, oh, this is a construct, and I shouldn't always just get stuck in this one metaphor. I should approach it in different ways. And then Leslie loves A Wrinkle in Time, which is of course such a brilliant story and film. So that could be a wonderful additional activity that you could definitely invite all ages to. And then I also love the dig deeper here with the Chimamanda Adichie TED Talk about the danger of a single story. When you are only stuck inside your culture, it's probably the best TED Talk of all time. I love it so much. I always show it to my students. And yeah, so this one I just think is such a rich, I mean, I feel like this one lesson could easily be like 4 or 5. If you wanted to, and you can just see where those youth want to go with it, because when you start asking questions like, what is a cultural thing we don't think we should keep, and how can we go about telling different stories about it, like that is such a generative space to see what bubbles up.
The last invitation is to plan a session that includes intentional boredom and see what creativity it generates.
No phones allowed.
with some, and there's a post to some inspiration
and then
and challenges.
the coloring page here is a Nelson Mandela quote that I definitely need to color that one in myself.
And something that we did with this second set of lessons, which I'll go back and do for the first set, is that we had something for younger children as well. So if you were doing this in your church through the whole congregation, there's something even for the youngest. And that's usually one or two of one session, certainly, but possibly they can do the all ages activity as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's the sample, and we'll definitely get that emailed to you afterwards so that you can all have that if you want. And I wanted to open up now for Q&A and hear from all of you.
Wow. So Daneen, Wendy, thank you so much for this. What a gift. What a true gift it is to listen and to glean from your wisdom. So very grateful for that. Just a reminder to folks that the video for this session will go out in an email if you register for the event, and you will also receive those 2 sample pieces of curricula that Daneen and Wendy were highlighting. So again, thank you for your generosity and gifting us with those too. We have a few questions, and folks, a gentle reminder, please feel free to throw questions into the chat at this time. Happy to hear from your wisdom as well. But just to get things started, and I see one question in the chat already that I'll get to in just a sec, but just as a beginning question, you both named in the presentation that stories are, of course, central to who we are as people of God and as people in general. And you also used what I think is a really provocative idea. You mentioned a really provocative idea, at least to me. You said that we can trust stories to do their work. I'm wondering if you can say more about that and perhaps provide an example of where you've seen an individual or a group or people or whatever really connect with a story and use that to galvanize them, perhaps in church world.
Oh, goodness. Yes. That's a big question. I love it. Well, I have a couple different thoughts of that. But I'm gonna keep it super simple. So one of the stories that I have found really profound in modeling transformation that I think all of you have seen, which is why I mention it, is a picture that I keep at my desk. Does anybody recognize this? This is,
move it over this way.
There we go.
To the side. There you go.
So this is Moana. Great children's film. And this is a story of redemption that does not involve violence. And we do not get a lot of those in our culture. And this is one that I think we need more of these types of stories because, of course, this Moana she's trying to restore the heart of Te-Fiti. And Te-Fiti has been robbed by one of the demigods, Maui. And Maui believes that a great fight is going to be had, and he's prepared for to to maybe not survive this fight. And then Moana recognizes that actually this fire demon who they think they have to fight is actually this fertility goddess of abundance, but in her harmed stage, she has become brittle and fiery and destructive. There's a lot of layers on that, actually, that I don't need to, and so she restores this heart and she sings this beautiful song. They have stolen the heart from within you, but this does not define you. I know who you are. It's such a powerful story. And it is what allowed me to move actually through Easter atonement stories with my children to find a different story. And before I found other stories of original blessing and thinking about that story through different lenses. So Moana is our family's Easter tradition, is watching this story, because it is this powerful story of restoration and reconciliation that does not require violence. Now, it does require a restoration. It requires the heart to be restored. The wrong has to be remedied and recognized and named. And then of course there's, a flowering of abundance and growth. So that's one. And another super simple one is, so I have this 15-year-old, but I also have an 8-year-old, and she's listening to the Chronicles of Narnia for the first time. And she, because of some ways that she has heard Bible stories used, isn't thrilled at the moment with Bible stuff. She kind of has a hard no if I mention Jesus or Bible stories. But if I talk about Aslan, she's fine. And so we will talk about somebody died recently, and she could understand, and she wanted to pray that they were in Aslan's country, even though heaven language didn't work for her. And I do think that because of the harms that have been done to so many of our biblical stories, that finding these stories that come alongside and teach things that we want to instill and live by, I live by these stories too. I decided to have a child because I had read the Harry Potter books and wanted to believe that ultimately love was the most powerful force in the universe, which is, I know there's some other things about that series right now, but ultimately I still think that story is a powerful one of love, having the final say. And that's how I now tell the Easter story. It's a love wins story.
Well,
death
yes,
didn't get the final
absolutely.
story.
And that's
With
the
no word.
story. That's the way I grew up hearing the Easter story, was that God's love is stronger than anything, even death on a cross. I never heard a substitutionary or violent atonement preached ever in my entire all my years in the Episcopal Church.
No wonder you're so cheerful, Wendy.
So, well, no, I mean, I think it's important to say, I mean, there is difficult theology embedded in our Eucharistic prayers and in our hymnody, but I never heard it preached. And that was a gift, but it's also not something new, because I'm 60 years old. So it is something that we are reclaiming, perhaps. And the fastest we have two fastest growing demographics in our church right now, which are families with very young children, 0 to 3, and people in their 20s and 30s. And we also have a large influx. This is Seattle, which is now has just been written about as the least religious city in the entire United States. But we have all kinds of people coming to us on a regular basis who are ex-evangelicals or former Roman Catholics, who really didn't know that this kind of Christianity existed. And I think, we have not done a good enough job about sharing our stories.
Yeah, if we tell the good stories, they'll do their work. We don't have to stress about the details.
And we have a good story. We have a really good story, which is that is that nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me a quick direct question about how I do tell the Easter story, and that's not necessarily one we have enough time to go into here. I actually think a whole session can be done about this, but
you do have a lesson though that
I do have we do have a lesson, and I wrote a blog about this on the
Yeah,
Holy
we
Troublemakers
can share your blog
website.
post.
I don't
We can
remember
provide
exactly, but
resources.
it's,
We can provide resources at the end.
Yeah.
That'll go out later.
it's about teaching that Jesus came to show us how to live. That death was an interruption, but it's a love win story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear, there are multiple ways to educate and to pass along faith stories. And for those who have, this is all very contextual, right? There are some of us who grew up hearing atonement theory as just normative, as the understanding of what happened on the cross. If that is you, and if you're thinking, gosh, what are these women talking about right now? I invite you to touch base with me or with other clergy who can sort of provide a broader perspective. There's some really good readings out there and some different things that name that atonement theory, and specifically substitutionary atonement theory, is a relatively new phenomenon in Christianity, and that's something that we need to be mindful of. But yes, there are lots of different ways to do this. So grateful that we're kind of hearing from different perspectives of our Christian tradition. Let's see. So there was a second question posted in the chat that is basically referencing Ephesians, and says that Paul, or one of his followers in that book, reminds us why teaching progressive values might be difficult for folks who don't act out of their original blessing as being created children of God. And this person's asking, what role does conversion to a progressive Christian faith or to other Christian faiths have in enabling people to further peace and justice? So a little bit farther afield than what we've been discussing in this conversation, but a ponderous thing anyway. And if I could sort of add some additional language to clarify, and again, this comes from Terry. So Terry, if you want to jump in, feel free to. But throwing my own slight spin on it, I guess I wonder whether folks who are new to Christianity or to another progressive faith find themselves captivated and galvanized, or struggling with some of the tapes that we often play in Christianity. If we didn't grow up in this faith, we've experienced something different, as opposed to, Daneen, and what you were sharing at the very beginning of your story, hearing these things come from the pulpit, and having to unwind some of those things, right, in one's own psyche and in the psyche of a child too, versus coming at it afresh. So I don't know if there's anything you all want to jump in on with that.
So our dean just recently preached a 2-part series on Paul's letters. And I had asked him, I'd suggested that he might want to look at Beth Allison Barr's book, which, she's a historian at Baylor University, and her book is the making of biblical womanhood. And he did, and it was important information for him, not that he had a different take on it before, but it's part of the current conversation. I think we so often misread or misunderstand Paul because we are not looking at the context in which these letters were written. And so I think that's been enormously helpful to me, because while I didn't hear a lot of Paul in, except as he appeared in the lectionary, it wasn't something that was widely preached on in my growing up years. As an adult, it was something I struggled with because of the narrative that I was hearing in the culture, not the church. And so contextually, it absolutely matters to know more about where he's coming from, because guess what? It was especially in terms of the roles that women play, understanding the household codes, any of that. Context is everything. And we're only hearing pieces of a story. And so context and history matter to fill in some of the pieces that we're missing. I would also say, I'm not interested in political correctness. I'm not interested in social justice in and of itself as much as I am interested in living and acting on gospel values. And I think we can't say that often enough in this present moment. It's just important to name that Jesus was the original holy troublemaker. Well, no,
Yeah.
there are plenty of examples in Hebrew scriptures, but for us as Christians, he's our holy troublemaker, and we're following him.
Yeah, I super appreciate that. And I think just to tack on to that, something I say a lot in the church, we hear a lot about not wanting to be too political in the church. I often will kind of add a corrective to that I don't believe Christ shows an example of being partisan. Jesus met and ate and communed with everybody who was interested in meeting with him. But he was political. It's part of what got him killed and got him into trouble with the authorities of the day. So I think we can separate out partisanship from politics. You know, Wendy, as you were saying earlier, about the congregation that got in so much trouble for 2.5 years, struggling to say, but we have a theology of peace, right? That's not not partisanship. It is political, but it is not partisanship. So I do think that's a helpful boundary to make there. But yeah, so let's see. There was another question about wondering about effective ways to reach youth and build camaraderie within youth groups, and wondering if stories are a means by which one can do that and how that might look.
Absolutely. That was the impetus for this, was imagining a different, an emphasis on storytelling in youth group. And the lovely thing is we've had a lot of positive feedback since the first curriculum came out in 2021. Is that right?
You know what? Everything in that early days is such a blur to me. I think it was 21.
And so very much still in the pandemic, and people weren't necessarily meeting in person. They were meeting online and wanting to connect their groups with something that would be meaningful and accessible online, because you can't play games in the same way as you would if you were gathering, or you can't have meals together in the same way as you were gathering in person.
Yeah, and I really think there's a level of stories help us build that shelter. Getting back to Gareth Hagen's work about transformative storytelling. And when we share stories, it's a way to help us catch courage and also, and like our values, and it helps us get language and shared language. And we can come back to that over and over. It's like, okay, what is Bayard going to teach us right now? What is Mary going to teach us right now? Reverend Gafney, what is she teaching us on this? And I think it helps. And in some ways, because it's not you saying, here are our values, which has a way of inviting pushback. When you come at it through story and allow them to push back on the stories or tell their own stories, like that's part of the trusting of the process, is not knowing where it's going to end necessarily.
It connects kids to their own stories and empowers them to share those. And frankly, once they get to college, there's a lot of that. And I'm amazed to find that my college kid is continually finding opportunities. He comes to church with us. He was a chorister, so, still loves music, still loves liturgy, isn't sure what he believes, but he finds ways to bring his upbringing in a progressive Episcopal context into his life as a college student regularly, and very without any shame or hesitation. And I'm just really impressed by that. That's something that's it's relevant to him, especially because he's at a campus where kids are really engaged in holy troublemaking, maybe, or at least making good trouble if they're not coming from a religious context. It happens that he goes to an Episcopal school, Bard College, but that's kind of coincidental. And so, he was able to talk about so much of share so many stories that he was a part of creating as well. It's not just the stories he heard and internalized, but the stories that he enacted through his youth group, through his practices in an intergenerational context. That's just, that's a good sign.
That's a really good sign.
Jill, I have a good
yeah.
sign when you're ready for it. I have a blessing song that brings a lot of this story that we've been talking about today together in a way that also invites awe and wonder, which I also think is super important for us to return to.
Yes.
Sidebar note, the #1 antidote to anxiety is awe and wonder. So
lots of good research for that.
Yeah, tons of research coming out about that right now. So if you're ready, I have a special guest standing by for that.
Yes, absolutely. Let me make one quick note. I see your questions in the chat, folks. I'm going to have an opportunity to talk with both Daneen and Wendy separately in an interview setting, and I am keeping tabs on all of your questions. So if we're not going to get to them today, but I will get you those, and there will be snippets of that interview on our website. So if you're hankering for an answer, it will come.
And I invite reaching out. I love to chat with folks. You can find me very easily at holytroublemakers.com. And we made a discount code. If anybody wants to buy anything, Yale 25. We'll get 25% off any of the books or curriculum at holytroublemakers.com. The books are on Amazon, but I can't control anything there. So it's at Holy Troublemakers that discount works. Yale 25.
And I will say that very, very happy to chat with Catherine about the Bible and what's in it. It's absolutely important to wrestle with it. But yes, I've got a lot of writing already on that subject and strong opinions.
And we're a nonprofit. We're a nonprofit little publisher, and we give everything away for free if anybody needs that also, by the way. So that's also an easy ask via just the contact form there.
Thank you both. Yes, Daneen, feel free to take it away with your plan.
So if you all want to go back to the story I told you about the young family in church with the 3 or 4-year-old who was worried after that sermon that was inside a different type of story than the one that I realized I wanted to raise her in. And before I realized there's a long, long, long tradition of the original blessing story. That kid is now 15 and she is here.
I'm her favorite 15-year-old daughter.
And she has a song that's a blessing that I think wraps up what we've been talking about today in a lovely way.
I am grateful to be lungs breathing, heart beating, joyous and free. Even though the hard times are all around me, I am grateful to be like a bird in the sky, like a dragonfly, even like the leaves all shimmering and green. What lives in them lives in me. What lives in them lives in me. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Lily.
Yeah, thanks for letting me hop on and say hi.
What a gift.
Thank
you.
Yes, no problem.
I appreciate it very much. Well, that's my blessing and my hope. Let us remember that what lives in them lives in me, even like the leaves all shimmering and green.
What a gift. Thank you both so much. Thanks to Lily as well. And blessings to you all, folks. Thank you for joining us for today.